Thor and Rai are twin brothers who live in a technologically advanced space colony several light years away from Earth, which is a part of the Balkan star system. Their mother and father happen to be important scientists working within the space colonies of the Balkan star system. Thor and Rai live a comfortable life with their long-lived dream of one day going to planet Earth. Both their lives take a drastic turn as they come home to see their parents lying dead on the ground with no idea of who has done the deed. Their lives finally hit rock bottom when they are exiled to the harsh planet of Chimera, with no clear explanation as to why their parents were killed and why they have been brought here. They both come out of their pod to discover that planet Chimera is filled with carnivorous plants that would attempt to gobble any living thing that comes within range. They both then turn their backs to see several lifeless-looking people staring at them. Just as they start to believe that this is the end of the road for them, a man named Zagi steps up and tells the rest of them to stand down and leave, and then after they're gone, he introduces himself to the twins as the leader to that crowd of people. Zagi takes a walk with them while mentioning that Chimera is a prison planet for ferocious criminals and animals. Then all of a sudden, a plant tries to attack Rai, but Zagi comes over just in time to ward it off by using a liquid known as Musa sap. Afterwards, Zagi informs them both that on this planet, plants are at the top of the food chain, so to survive, they would have to revert back to the ways of a beast. On getting back to their base, Rai is seen lying on the floor because he has just spilled the last bit of their water supply, meaning that they have no water left. The others get so frustrated by this that they start to beat up Rai as a form of punishment for being so clumsy. Thor sees this and immediately rushes in and tells them to stop beating his brother up. However, they don't seem to care about what Thor has just said, so they start to beat them both up, all while Zagi sits back to enjoy the show. About an hour later, Rai sits in a cave and starts to cry because his brother Thor has gone unconscious from the beating he took from the others. Zagi then comes in and tells Rai to wait for him outside so he can have a word with Thor. As Thor lies on the ground, he isn't able to move but can still hear, so Zagi advises him to leave his brother because he's far too weak and may end up being the reason for his death. Zagi says that Rai has no chance of survival in a place like this, so he believes that Rai may just end up being killed sooner or later. However, Thor refuses to kill his only brother, so Zagi decides to drop the topic and just tells him that he will understand sooner or later. A couple of hours later, Thor and Rai are seen walking through the forest, and after a little while, Rai starts to whine and complain about the heat, so he falls down to the ground and says that he can't take this anymore. Thor looks back and realizes what Zagi meant, being that he won't survive for long as Rai is with him. So with this in mind, Thor draws his beam blade and attempts to take Rai out, but he stares into his eyes in the last few seconds and doesn't have the heart to kill his twin brother, so he puts the sword down. Just then, a group of beastmen suddenly surround them, with their leader coming forward to tell them both that they are trespassing on their territory, so as punishment for that, they would have to be executed. Thor understands the kind of situation they are in, so he brings out his beam blade and calmly offers it to the leader as a peace trade to let them off with a warning. But just as he gets within range, he uses it to stab the leader straight through the chest. This causes the others around to rush towards Thor, preparing to attack, but he is easily able to take some of them out with his beam blade. Then all of a sudden, one of the enemies starts to shoot their gun at Thor, which irritates the carnivorous plant behind him, causing him to get eaten by it. Thor looks over at Rai and sees that he is in a vulnerable position, so he runs over to save him, but before he can get there, Rai has been swallowed by the plant. After this, it doesn't take long before Thor himself starts to get eaten. However, he is saved in his final moment by a girl who he doesn't recognize. Thor then wakes up in a bed and sees that his wounds have been bandaged up, after which he looks to the door and sees the girl who saved him walk in. As the girl inquires about his condition, Thor can't help but stare at her because it's been a while since he has had an interaction with a girl. She introduces herself to him as Tiz, the Sun Ring's second female. Following that, she informs him that he is now in the Okr's stronghold, which confuses him because she's a member of the Sun Ring. Tiz senses his confusion, so she explains that on this planet, the women are protected at all costs since they are the only ones who can bear children and also because there are not that many left. Just then, Thor remembers what happened to Rai, so he gets out of bed and is about to start searching for him, but before he can reach the door, Tiz tells him that Rai is dead. Thor refuses to believe that his brother is dead, so he gets out of the room and still plans on going out to search for him. He reaches the building balcony and realizes that he has just been going in circles this entire time. A man who claims to be the Okra Ring's third in command walks up to Thor and kindly offers him some water. At first, Thor thinks that he's an enemy, but Tiz comes out from the hall to inform him that he was the one who carried him all the way here. Thor is relieved to hear this, but he falls to the ground because he is still very weak, after which they both come over and assure him that nothing bad is going to happen to him because she has chosen him to become her husband. However, Thor doesn't want to be chosen by anyone and also wants to make his own decisions on his destiny, so he immediately gets up to run out. Tiz thinks about chasing him but realizes that there is no point in doing that because she knows that he won't be able to make it out of there. He walks around the building for a while and considers it to be a giant maze because he can't seem to find the exit. Then all of a sudden, he sees a large crowd of people running in the opposite direction, so he is curious as to where they are going. So to satisfy his curiosity, he follows them all to a fight arena where the leader of the Ochre Ring known as Top is being challenged by an opponent who is trying to become the new Top. Before the battle begins, Tiz stands beside Thor and explains to him that if the Tri can beat the Top, then he will become the new leader. Shortly after, the battle commences and Top completely manhandles the opponent, leading him to his victory. The audience watches this and isn't all that surprised because Top is known to be the strongest man among them all in the Ochre Ring. As the audience cheers the Top on, Tiz informs Thor that he has been able to defend his status as a Top for years, meaning that no one has ever been able to defeat him. After the battle, the Third takes Thor to have a meeting with Tops, since he was the one who defeated the Second in command, and on getting there, Top isn't impressed by Thor in the slightest, so he just slaps him across the face and tells him that he would allow him to stay for Tiz's sake, although his life isn't guaranteed. A couple hours later, as Thor lays in bed, Tiz sits at his bedside and asks him to become her husband, but he refuses to marry her because he doesn't like the fact that men don't have their choice of wife on this planet. Just then, Rika comes to inform Tiz that the Top is currently looking for her, so she was out of the room while telling Thor that she will soon be back. About 30 minutes after that, Thor comes into the room to bring Thor some food but is surprised to see that he is gone. Once Tiz is made aware of this, she traces him until she finds him walking along the wooden board path. After she asks him where he is going, he replies by saying that he is going to leave this place and look for a way to get back to his planet. Tiz doesn't like this idea, so she goes in front of him to block his path, while telling him that he can't go anywhere because she has chosen him to become her husband. Thor doesn't even have any feelings for her in the first place, so he decides to take a different path by walking along the soil ground below. He takes a step in it and notices that his leg has sunk in, so Tiz explains that what he stepped in is a live, endless swamp, so he won't be able to get out without help. Then all of a sudden, the ground starts to rattle and is erupted by a giant carnivorous plant, which throws both Thor and Tiz into the air. Before they get squished by the fall impact, Thor uses his beam blade to stop himself and Tiz in midair by stabbing the plant monster. However, it doesn't look like he will be able to hold it for long because his wounds from earlier are starting to get loose. Then just as he is about to let go, Thor comes out of nowhere on his hoverbike and saves them both with perfect timing. As they ride back, Tiz is confused as to why he had risked his life for her even though he had rejected her a few moments before the incident. On getting back to base, once Thor is bandaged up, Tiz decides to give up her title as second of the Ochre Rings because she wants to live beside Thor for the rest of the time since he had saved her. A woman and her squad are seen to arrive at the Ochre stronghold, all while she gives an order to her subordinates telling them to find Tiz at all costs and retrieve her. Meanwhile, Thor takes a walk around the giant plants that have germinated what looks like a plant colony, and he finds it to be a nice sight to see, so he walks around to absorb the ambience. Just then, Tiz swings in on a vine and comes to greet him. As they both share a conversation, Thor starts to get moody because he feels terrible that his brother has died while he was kept alive, and at the same time, he is still curious to know why they were abandoned on this planet. Tiz sympathizes with him and then recalls that there is a man named Colin who must know something about him being abandoned here. Thor hears this and immediately gets a string of hope, so he asks Tiz to take him there. However, Colin is a member of Sun Ring, and since Tiz had relinquished her title without permission, she feels that it may be a little awkward for her to show her face there. But since she still feels indebted to Thor for saving her life, she still decides to take him there. On their way to see Colin, they run into Top Chen, who was informed earlier that Tiz had left the Sun Ring without permission, so she now demands for her to come back at once. At first, Tiz shows her stubbornness by telling Chen as she wants to stay with Thor since he was the one who saved her life. Upon hearing this, Chen doesn't like the sound of it, so she has her subordinates point their guns at her and threaten to kill her if she doesn't leave Thor and come back to Sun Ring. Tiz can tell that Chen is serious about this threat, so she bids Thor goodbye and walks towards Chen to hand herself over. But right before she reaches the other side, Thor has an idea, so she runs towards Tiz to grab her dagger from her strap, after which he throws it at a nearby plant, which traps Chen momentarily, giving them both the chance to escape. At this point, Tiz is devastated that Thor has just attacked the Sun Ring's female Top, because going by tradition, it means that they're going to be killed. A few minutes after hanging at their hiding spot, Top Chen and her subordinates have found them, and even though Thor had previously attacked her, she still gave Tiz one last chance to return back to Sun Ring with them, but she still didn't want to go back, so she just hides behind Thor with hope that he is going to protect. But with no clever plan up his sleeve, he has no choice but to challenge Chen to a duel, with the condition that Tiz would be free if he wins and she would take his beam blade if he loses. They both start to fight, and as expected, Thor is easily overpowered by Chen. Then as he remains on the floor, he doesn't lose hope and simply starts to think of what her weakness could be. So in their next collision, Thor tilts his beam blade at the right angle, which breaks Top Chen's sword, making him the winner of the duel. So as promised, she grants Tiz the freedom to do whatever she wants. Just then, one of Chen's subordinates gets swallowed by a ground monster known as a Verisona. Chen knows just how dangerous this monster is, so she tells Thor and Tiz to get the hell out of there if she is to get killed, after which she picks up her gun and gets ready to battle it. Shortly after, the monster erupts from the ground and Chen starts to shoot her gun directly at it, but it doesn't seem to have any effect on it. Thor knows that he needs to act quickly, so he picks up a gun and runs onto the Verisona's body while starting to shoot at it. This makes the monster get annoyed, so it moves at a very high speed, while Thor is on its back. He continues to shoot at its body, but there seems to be little to no effect, but after a few moments he finds its weak spot and then uses his gun to shoot at it, causing the Verisona to die in the lake. Tiz is very impressed because Thor is the first person she has ever seen take a Verisona down on his own, so she runs over to hug him. Following this, Chen walks in to acknowledge that he has saved their lives, so she gives him her thanks and is now indebted to him. A couple of hours later, as Thor rides back home with Third, he mentions to Third that he's aware that only a high-ranking person known as the Beast King has the right to leave the planet, so with this in mind, he plans on going to have a meeting with him so they can work something out together since he wants to get back to his home planet. Third hears this and starts to laugh because this planet currently has no Beast King, meaning that if Thor ever wants to leave Chimera, he himself would have to become the Beast King. Now, while Thor and Tiz are having a conversation, Third walks in on them and overhears something about Tiz being Thor's second, so he is quite intrigued to hear what it is about. Tiz then explains to him that she and Thor have decided to create their very own ring, with Thor being the top and herself being the second. Third finds this fascinating, but sees a major flaw in their plan, being that they don't have anyone to fill in as their third in command. Tiz understands his point and has a pouty look on her face while she says that they will figure that out later. So with this being said, Third asks to join their ring to be the third in command. Thor is confused as to why he would offer to join because he's already a member of the Ochre Ring, but Third just assures him that he would be fine with taking on both jobs. So with this in mind, Tiz gives him his first mission, which is to take them to Colin, so that Thor can acquire more information about why he was sent to this planet. Thor gives Tiz a disdainful look after she asks him this, mainly because he believes that Third wouldn't agree to it, so he simply doesn't want him to get involved in the first place. But to his surprise, Third instantly agrees and even insists that they start going immediately since it's already getting quite dark. On their way there, Thor rides on Third's bike and remains confused as to why he had agreed to become his ring's third. Then a couple minutes later, they arrive in a rocky terrain which is said to be where Colin resides. Tiz gets off her air bike and walks into the cave while calling out Colin's name. A thick and beefy man then walks out of the shadow who happens to be the man they have been searching for. After Tiz has given her greeting, Thor comes over to introduce himself, and once he mentions his surname, Colin immediately recognizes it, meaning that he knows something either about why his parents were killed or why he was sent here. Colin takes him to the main cave and explains to Thor that it was the general overseer known as Odin who had ordered his parents to be killed over a false accusation. Thor hears this and isn't able to bear the news, so he runs out of the cave and goes to sit down at the end of a cliff while he beats himself up for not being sharp enough to save both his parents and Rai from death. Tiz then comes out to cheer him up by saying that none of this is his fault, and then at the same time, she advises him to become the Beast King so that he would be able to leave the planet and finally find out what happened. And since she is his second, it would be her duty to follow him to the ends of the earth. Just then, Third comes out as well to tell them that it's time to start going, but immediately he turns his back. He gets shot by a sniper hiding in the valley. Thor sees this and swiftly rushes over to him because he thinks that Third has been killed, but to his surprise, he gets up after a few moments and appears to be unharmed because he is wearing a bulletproof vest. Third then sits up and tells Thor that this is a very normal experience for him, seeing that basically everyone wants to kill him, so he just made sure to prepare himself. Then as they walk off, Thor thinks to himself and finally realizes that in this world, people don't care that much about death, and at the same time, those who can't protect themselves will die for nothing. Then before they leave the canyon, Colin speaks with Tiz and informs her that he is from the same colony as Thor, and back there, everyone on the planet is to undergo a life extension surgery which would enable them to live longer than they're meant to. Colin took that surgery several years ago, and that is the only reason he is still alive up until now. However, since Thor didn't undergo the surgery before he was abandoned at Chimera, Colin fears that Thor would be dead even before he reaches 30 years old. Tiz is sad to hear this, so when they get back to base, she urges him to find a way to take the surgery, otherwise he will die. So since he obviously doesn't want to die that early, he hops on Third's airbike and rides over to Colin's canyon with the hope that he will find a way to get the life extension surgery done on Thor. But to their surprise, they go into the cave to see that Colin has been killed by some carnivorous plants, which doesn't make sense because plants aren't likely to attack in this kind of region, meaning that someone had planned his death. They go back to base and inform Third that Colin has been killed, but he doesn't really care about it and just tells them to forget about it. This reaction shocks Thor, which makes him start to get a bit suspicious of Third. A couple of minutes later, Third is being bullied by the Top as usual by throwing a cup on the floor repeatedly and telling him to pick it up, but Thor can't stand this incessant attitude, so he kicks the cup over and insults the Top for treating Third like that. Then after this, Third announces to them all that Thor has issued a tri-challenge to the Top. Tiz hears this and knows that it's bad news because she doesn't think that he has a chance of defeating him. Even though Thor never planned on challenging the Top, at first he thinks that Third may have announced it due to misunderstanding, but after a little while, his two brain cells click, making him realize that Third had intentionally set him up. Since Thor is pissed off at the fact that Third got him into this battle, he goes over to punch him right in the face. After this, he demands an explanation as to why he did that, so Third explains that he did that simply because he believes that it was fate that brought him to this planet, and since he possesses both good combat and decision-making skills, Third honestly believes that he has what it takes to become the Beast King. Following this, Third takes him to the battle arena where the fight will take place with thousands of people watching them. Third then draws Thor's attention to a corner in the wall and instructs him to draw the Top towards that corner at the right time, after which he would handle the rest. However, it's also made aware to him that he will be killed if he fails to execute this plan at the right time. Then after this, Thor takes a walk along the germinated plants and feels very anxious about this fight because he knows that one wrong move will make him end up dead. But regardless, he is still determined to take up the challenge because he knows that is what his father would have wanted him to do. Then the next day, Thor steps into the arena and is now face to face with Top, who feels very confident that this is going to be yet another easy win. Top was surprised to see that Thor even showed up to the duel. Since he's here, he doesn't plan on granting him a quick death, but rather a long and pain-filled one. The Top starts the battle off by dashing at Thor and launching an overhead attack, but Thor uses his small stature to his advantage and simply dodges his attacks. Then, when the time is right, he tackles Top, causing him to fall, after which Thor tries to stab him with his blade, but Top manages to counter the attack. He looks to the corner that Third told him to go to, but he feels that it's still too early, so he figures that he has to stall for more time. While he's having this thought, Top comes out of nowhere and uses his sword to strike Thor right across the shoulder, causing him to bleed out while he falls to the floor. From the crowd, Tiz continues to cheer him on, so he gets up and starts to make his way to the corner. He finally gets there and is shocked to see that Third hasn't made any move to hurt him, so his eyes start to shake as he starts to believe that Third has betrayed him. Top then looks down at him with a smirk on his face, and just as Thor starts to accept his fate, Third shoots a bullet at the ground, causing Top to get distracted. Thor sees this and realizes that this is the opening that Third had created for him, so he quickly picks his sword up and uses it to stab and kill Top, thereby making him the new Top. However, since he has been stabbed earlier, he is currently losing a lot of blood, so falls down to the ground amidst his victory and goes unconscious. A couple hours later, Thor is seen lying unconscious in bed, while Tiz begs him to wake up, but he doesn't seem to be answering her call. Then all of a sudden, his pulse disappears, so Third panics and starts to slap him across the face while Tiz gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which is somehow able to restore his pulse. Later that night, Thor wakes up and sees Tiz sitting at his side, who is very glad to see that he has woken up. Third then comes in and offers Thor the necklace, which symbolizes that he's now the new Top, but Thor doesn't want to wear it simply because of how much he despised the old time. During this time, Thor looks at Tiz and Third, which gives him some hope that he will be able to live a good life on this planet with them by his side, and eventually he will become the Beast King, so he can finally find out what happened to his parents. Meanwhile, Zagi is seen to be standing on top of a mountain, while he tells his subordinate that he's soon going to be the top of the Ochre Ring. At this point in the story, a light-haired assassin breaks into the Blonde Ring region simply to kill all their members, including their top. However, one of the survivors can make it out of there and then heads straight for the Ochre Ring in the thick snow to ask for some assistance. This event takes place several years into the future, so the survivor asks for the Ochre Ring's top to see a 16-year-old Thor standing with Tiz by his side. The survivor informs Thor that he has come all the way here to deliver a message from the Night Ring's top named Jisoo. Following this, they all have a sitting with the survivor, who informs Thor of a notorious assassin known as White Wolf who has been causing some major trouble in their territory. White doesn't even aim at becoming the Beast King, but rather just to exterminate the entire population. The survivor's top had been killed by the White Wolf, but right before he died, he asked him to pass a message to Thor, informing him that he was the only one who had stopped the White Wolf. After this, Thor goes back into the room to talk with Third, who tells him to utilize the opportunity with the White Wolf to become the Beast King, since the White Wolf's next target is the Sun Ring. Third reasons that things would fall to advantage no matter who wins, meaning that he would be able to become the Beast King with a single move. However, Thor doesn't support this idea because he considers it to be way too inhumane, and also because he wants to leave this planet as a human being and not as a beast. Just then, Tiz walks in to alert Thor that the Sun Ring's top, who goes by the name Yuki, has arrived in their territory. So with this being said, the three of them travel through the snowy tundra to honor Yuki's invitation. Then after a few minutes, they enter a small village house to see Yuki awaiting their arrival, and on seeing them, he spends the first few minutes giving them a warm welcome. Following this, he gets to the point and informs them that he despises the manner in which White Wolf has been killing members of the other rings. Because of this, he wishes to partner with Thor and his subordinate to take White Wolf down once and for all. Yuki is certain that White Wolf will attack them tonight, so he suggests that they lure him into the territory and then attack him on both flanks. But before that, since Yuki is aware that Third and Chen used to be very close, he informs him that 4 years ago, Chen had fought in a lethal duel which led to an injury so severe that she had to have her leg amputated. Ever since then, Chen has barely been eating and has almost basically given up on life, so Yuki hopes that Third would be able to talk some sense into her. But just then, a man bursts into the room to inform Yuki that Chen has said that she doesn't want to speak with anyone. So because of this, Third has decided to honor her pride and refuses Yuki's proposal. Yuki understands Third's reason for doing this, so he doesn't hold a grudge and just says that he would go and try to talk to Chen himself. Now shortly after, while Yuki is having a talk with Chen, they both suddenly hear some loud gunshots, so Yuki looks outside to see that White Wolf and his subordinates have come to launch their attack on his ring. White Wolf wishes to be direct with his attack, so he calls Yuki out to have a boss battle with him, to which he quickly accepts because he thinks he is going to emerge on top. Thor gets back to his base and starts to think about whether he should have that meeting alone with Zagi, because a small part of him feels that it may be a trap. He goes down the stairs to see Tiz waiting for him, and apparently she has very good ears, so she heard when Zagi asked him to meet up at the Dagger Pagoda. Tiz wants to accompany them to this meeting, but Thor isn't allowing her to come because Zagi specifically mentioned that he should come alone. However, Tiz proves her stubborn nature, so she ends up going with him. They arrive at a snowy location to see Zagi waiting patiently for his arrival. Zagi sees that Thor has come with Tiz, so he tells him to come forward and leave Tiz behind to wait for him. So with this being said, Thor goes forward alone to have a conversation with Zagi, who tells him that while he was a kid, he bombed an exposing faction while he was on Thor's home planet of Juno, and since that is considered to be a serious crime, his penalty for this was life imprisonment on a planet known as Hecate. Then after a year of being in the juvenile facility, he somehow managed to get out of his cell, only to enter a room filled with over 20 generations of former Beast Kings. This was something that no commoner was supposed to see, so as a precaution to not have that information leaked, Zagi was abandoned on Chimera, just like Thor. Zagi's whole point in telling this story is to inform Thor that there's simply no point in fighting so hard to become the Beast King, because apparently the Phantom of Beast Kings never existed, so it's just bait to get the beasts to fight and kill each other. Thor hears this and immediately falls to his knees, because this means that everything he has been fighting for up until this stage has been pointless. However, Zagi tells Thor that if he still wants to become the Beast King after hearing this story, he will help him do it so that they both can create a new world here. Just then, Zagi senses that Tiz is eavesdropping on them, so after she comes out, he tells Thor to follow him back to his base so they can finish their conversation. Then as they walk away, 3 armed men who hold grudges against White Wolf try to kill him, but Thor manages to push him out of the way just in time. Then after, Nightwing's second known as Karen appears and uses her wires to kill the assassins. She then goes down to inquire about Zagi's condition, but Thor can't help but stare at her because he has never seen a woman as beautiful as she is. They travel until they reach the White Ring base, after which Zagi takes Thor to a private room and offers him a cup of joe, while informing him that he has plans to start an independence war, but he needs Thor to help him fight this battle, meaning that the two of them would be the ones to create a new world. Meanwhile, Karen takes Tiz to her room and tells her to wait for Thor to return. During their conversation, it is revealed that even as Zagi's second, she doesn't wish to bear his child because Zagi made a rule that whoever bears his child must stay away from him. And since she wants to be with him forever, she has chosen not to bear his child. After that, she leaves there and interrupts Zagi and Thor's conversation by coming to say that Tiz has a very stubborn nature. Because of this, Thor picks his cloak up and tells Zagi that they will continue this conversation later. After he leaves, Karin tries to warn Zagi against Thor because she thinks that he is very dangerous. Zagi hears this and then slaps her across the face because of what she has just said, after which he orders her not to speak in such a manner ever again. She falls down and then starts to bleed, but even with that, she continues to try and persuade Zagi not to associate with Thor anymore. But right before Zagi has the chance to slap her, Thor walks in and tells him to stop hitting her because even though she is his ring's second, she is still a woman. Since Karin has disobeyed Zagi's direct order, he tells her to pack her stuff and leave because she is no longer fit to be his second. Zagi does this because the #1 rule of the White Ring is that everyone has to obey his orders, but Karin has broken that rule, so she is being relieved of her position. Then about an hour later, Thor comes out of his room to be informed that Karin has left the stronghold amidst this mighty blizzard, so without hesitation, Thor rushes into the blizzard to find her, because he knows that she will die if she remains out there for any longer. He walks through the thick snow and eventually finds Karin lying on the snow. He tries to convince her to come back to the stronghold, but she doesn't want to go back because Zagi has abandoned her, meaning that she will be killed if she is to go back. Karin gets up and attempts to run further, but just then, she and Thor fall into an icy pit. Back at the Ochre Ring base, Thor has just been informed that Tiz and Thor have gone to meet up with Zagi, so he immediately plans on going there to get them. Meanwhile, Thor wakes up to find himself in a pit, which is surrounded by very thick roots. He then looks to the side to see Karin lying unconscious, so he rushes over to inquire about her condition. At the same time, Tiz is starting to get really worried ever since Thor left to find Karin, but following that, she looks out the window to see that the blizzard's already stopping, meaning that she can now go outside to search for Thor without running any risk against herself. Karin wakes up and immediately distances herself from Thor because she feels that her being abandoned by Zagi is all his fault. A couple of hours go by and Thor starts to get a little thirsty. He looks at the thick roots and notices that they happen to be storing water, so he pulls out his beam blade and attempts to get some water, but unfortunately, his sword isn't able to penetrate it for some reason, causing him to lose hope. More hours go by and Karin starts to get very frustrated because she feels that none of this would be happening if Thor never came along. So she vents her anger and begins to attack him until she uses her stem wire to stab Thor in the back. At this moment, she now realizes how big of a mistake she has made, so she rushes over to him to help and get the stem of the wire out of his back. During that attack, Thor's beam knife was knocked out of his hands, causing it to puncture one of the roots. Thor then goes over to it and notices that this part of the root is quite vulnerable, so he continues to stab at it and eventually finds a lower bunker that has enough water for them to last until they can find a way to get out of there. Meanwhile, Thor arrives in the Blind Ring region to search for Thor and Tiz. After a little while, he finds Tiz walking through the area also in search of Thor, so she hops on his air bike, and they both then continue the search for Thor. Simultaneously, Thor suggests to Karin that they both start climbing the roots so they can eventually escape back to the surface. But before they do this, Karin musters up some courage and confesses her feelings of love to Thor by telling him that he is the most handsome man she has ever seen. Apparently, Thor feels the same way about her, so they both share a kiss while they remain in the underground bunker. After that, Thor asks Karin to forget about Zagi and the White Ring and rather come with him to the Ochre Ring because she is the woman he wants to be with until death. As he asks this, he offers her his hand, to which she hesitantly accepts. Then about a day later, they finally make it out of the bunker and back to the surface. At that time, Tiz walks in and is very glad to see Thor, so she runs over to meet him. However, Tiz starts to get a little jealous when she realizes that Thor has been underground with Karin this entire time. So with this said, Thor steps forward and goes on to friend-zone Tiz by telling her that Karin is going to join Ochre's ring, and at the same time, she is the one that he wants to be with. Tiz hears this news and is totally heartbroken, so she runs away while wiping away some loose tears. But before Thor can even run after her, Zagi walks in and says that he needs to have a talk with Thor. After a thorough conversation with Zagi, Thor has now agreed to Zagi's terms and is going to get involved in his independence war, which would eventually make him the Beast King. However, since Thor knows that he only has 5 years left to live, he doesn't care about becoming the Beast King anymore, but rather mainly wants to find out why his parents were killed and why the planet Chimera even exists. Following this, Thor goes back to Tiz's room with hopes that he can cheer her up, but since he had friend-zoned her in front of everyone, she's still very angry at him. Thor continues to knock on the door repeatedly, but she remains inside the room with a sad look on her face and doesn't open up. Then after about half an hour of him knocking, Tis finally decides to open up the door, so Thor then takes her inside and speaks to her in a calm voice, telling her that he loves her only as a little sister, meaning that she can't be the one to bear his child. Meanwhile, Karen goes back to see Zagi, who is actually thankful for making Thor fall in love with her and get preoccupied, which makes him agree to take part in the Independence War. Then as they continue to talk for a bit, there seems to be a little too much romantic tension, so Karen makes the first move by kissing Zagi. After that, Zagi asks Karen whether she truly wants to bear his child or Thor's child as a test to see whether he can still trust her. The fact that she doesn't give a reply tells him all he needs to know, so he puts on his shroud and walks out. Karen is eager to let Zagi know her reply, so she goes outside to look for him, but strangely, she can't find him anywhere. She looks to the corner and sees someone walking with Zagi's same color shroud, so she assumes that has to be him. She walks until she manages to catch up to him, but on getting there, she's unexpectedly stabbed in the chest by him, after which he leaves her there to die. However, in Karen's final moments, she believes that it was Zagi who killed her, so she lies on the ground and doesn't regret this death because she feels that this was simply Zagi's way of showing her how much he loved her. Now, since Thor heard some screams coming from outside, he goes outside and is shocked to see that Karen has been killed. He holds her in his arms and tries asking her for the person who had killed her, but Tis then hugs him behind and tells him not to bother screaming her name because she has already died. Then all of a sudden, Thor recalls that he heard Karen screaming Zagi's name in distress a few moments before it happened, which makes him think that he was the one who killed her. Thor then runs full speed at Zagi and attempts to cut his head off, but he only ends up giving him a slight cut on the face. After this, Thor urges Zagi to draw his sword because he wants to have a duel so that he can avenge Karen's death. Then all of a sudden, Thor appears on top of a nearby roof and announces that since the last two tops have drawn their swords for battle, this is officially the battle to determine who will become the Beast King. They both begin to battle, and Thor seems to be having the upper hand because he has pushed Zagi onto the defensive. However, Chen watches the battle and has a feeling that this is going to end badly for Thor because she knows that Zagi has a backup blade hidden in his arm sleeve. Then after Thor manages to knock the sword out of his hand, Zagi throws his cloak at him as a distraction, and then follows the attack up by slicing through it with his backup blade. But to his surprise, Thor has evaded his attack and is now behind him. So in this vital position, Thor uses his beam blade to slash Zagi across the chest, which is a move that automatically puts Thor on the winning end. Zagi suppresses his wound and leans against one of the houses and informs Thor that he wasn't the one who killed Karen after all. So he tells Thor to come a little closer so he can tell him who had killed her. Tis hears this and has a feeling that this is a trap, so she warns Thor not to go ahead with it. But despite her warning, Thor still goes closer to Zagi, and on getting there, he uses his blood to draw a mark on his face, which symbolizes the Beast King. And then right before he dies, he gets close to Thor's ear and warns him to be careful of one of the Ochre Ring members. But before he can get any clarification, Zagi dies in his arms. At this point, Thor is now officially the Beast King, so Thor comes over and urges him to fulfill his lifelong dream of going to planet Hecate and finally find out what happened to his parents. Thor knows that this is the exact moment he has been waiting for his entire life, so he decides to go through with it. But first of all, he wishes to see Karen one last time before he leaves. Shortly, he stands over Karen's dead body and confesses his love for her once again. Then after, a giant spaceship appears as Thor and his crew get ready to board it. Thor enters the ship and is acknowledged by an automated voice as the 38th Beast King in existence. The three of them move further onto the ship and are greeted by three soldiers who inform him that as the Beast King, he has the right to go to the planet Hecate if he wishes to do so. However, even though this is exactly what Thor has been wishing for, a tiny part of him is telling him not to go for some reason. Shortly after, they are introduced to a renowned research worker known as Don Loki, who is a member of the same research team as Eva, Thor's mother. After their subtle conversation, they reach a certain point and Dawn informs them that only Thor is allowed to go ahead from that point onwards. Tis doesn't like the idea of this one bit, so she says that she still wants to follow him, but Thor calms her down and tells her to wait for him there because he will soon be back. Meanwhile, Dawn takes a look at Thor and acknowledges him to be a member of their army, with his real name being Lieutenant Sigurd Hiza. At the same time, Thor moves forward and is now in the same room with Commander Odin, the man who killed his parents 5 years ago. Although Odin is aware that Thor must hate him for killing his parents, he is still very glad to see him because he considers Thor to be the only one who can save humanity. However, Odin gets a little too close, so Thor pushes him to the ground. Thor is confused as to what Odin meant by him being the only one who can save humanity, so Dawn explains that in the next 50 years, all human life in the Balkan star system will be extinct. Over the last 100 years, only one childbirth had occurred in the Balkan star system, So the team of scientists had no choice but to use artificial fertilization to produce children, which develop in artificial wombs, meaning that they create humans of Balkan who will be able to survive on Chimera. Thor hears this and gets so pissed off because he feels that all he has worked for up until this point has no meaning anymore, so he grabs Odin by the collar and throws him to the ground. Some soldiers come and tell him to stop and even threaten to shoot at him, but Odin tells them not to harm Thor in any way because he is humanity's last hope. To add to this, Odin informs Thor that his mother was the only successful surrogate mother of an artificial embryo. Eva was involved in the experiment and gave birth to Thor naturally. Rai was one of the biologically engineered experiments, meaning that he and Rai aren't even related by blood. Thor hears this and understands it, but is still confused as to why he and Rai still have the same appearance even if they aren't related by blood. So Don explains that it's simply the power of Thor's DNA. At first, Thor even took on his mother's appearance, but later stuck to Rai's appearance as he grew accustomed to him. Thor's final test was to prove that he could survive in a cruel environment, which explains why he was sent to Chimera. But when Eva refused to cooperate, Odin had ordered his men to kill her and her husband because he didn't want anything to obstruct this project. Thor hears and understands all of this, but he falls down to the ground and starts to shed tears because he now feels like his life has no point. Now that Thor is aware of this, he immediately offers to be their human guinea pig because he sees his life as having no meaning anymore. Then of sudden, Thor walks, and Thor is surprised to see him now with silver hair and dressed in the army uniform. Apparently, Thor has been working for Odin this entire time, with his main objective being to make Thor become the Beast King in the time span of 10 years. During this time, Thor finds out that Thor was actually the one who killed Karin, so he grabs his collar in frustration. However, he soon realizes that there is no point, so he falls to his knees as he remains in disbelief. Ever since Thor was a child, he has always wanted to go to planet Earth, so now that he has been able to complete this mission successfully, Odin adds his name to the list of people who are traveling to Earth. Shortly after, Thor goes back to the lobby to see Tiz patiently waiting for him. After he sits down and breaks the news to him, Tiz still has a smile on her face and tells Thor that she doesn't care that he was biologically engineered. She loves Thor for who he is, so despite him not being born naturally, she still wishes to bear his child. Thor hears this and now realizes just how much Tiz loves him, so he gives her a warm hug while promising to bear a child with her when they get back to Chimera. Meanwhile, Don is in the office and Odin informs him that he is planning on increasing the self-rotation rate of Chimera because he is ready to start creating more life forms. However, Don doesn't support this idea because he knows that this means that everyone from Chimera will die, so he suggests that they start the reproduction process slowly so that the population would gradually resurface. Odin hears this and still insists on this because he wants to see this project live out in his lifetime. Don can't bear to see this happen, so he picks up his gun and shoots Odin in the stomach, causing him to bleed out. However, after the shot, Don realizes the huge mistake he has made, so he can't do anything but shiver in shock. Even though Odin has been shot, he still wants to see his plan live out, so he scans his palm on the control panel and begins the self-rotation process on Chimera. This command causes several alarms to start ringing out, which draws both Thor and Tiz attention, so they head straight for Odin's office to find out what is going on. On their way there, they run into Thor, who informs them that the siren they're hearing means that the self-rotation acceleration experiment has begun on Chimera. It's obvious to Thor that Thor doesn't know what that means, so he explains that the rotation system's components are buried underground in several places on Chimera. Then after 3 minutes of the command being issued, the buried system will release a giant metallic ball, and when this ball reaches Chimera's core, it will cause a massive earthquake to take place across the planet, which would in turn destroy all forms of life on it and also change the structure of the continent areas. Shortly after, they arrive at Odin's office, and Thor immediately grabs him by the collar and asks him for directions on how to stop the self-rotation, but Odin still wants it to happen, so he doesn't tell Thor anything useful. After this, he immediately runs back to Thor and asks him how to stop it, but he just remains mute. Then all of a sudden, Don speaks up and informs Thor that there's no way for them to stop it from this ship, so if he wishes to stop it, he would have to go to Hecate and enter the abort code in the main control system. Now that Thor knows how to stop it, he tells Thor to come along with him and gives Tiz the instructions to go back to Chimera and do her best to get everyone safe into the orbital elevator. Then after this, he and Thor suit up and begin their journey at Hecate. On getting to planet Hecate, the main control system senses that some intruders have arrived, so it immediately activates its security mode. Thor and the army go through the entrance and are surprised to see that all the guards who were on the ship have been killed. They advance and observe that one of their comrades has been attacked by a carnivorous plant, so they step in to save him and are shocked to see that the entire pathway has been blocked by the Verasona. This is a plant that Thor is quite familiar with, so with the help from Third, he is easily able to defeat it, just like he did when he was a kid. Meanwhile, Tiz and Chen are busy evacuating the entire population to the Elevation Orbital, which would be a craft that would save them from the incoming earthquake. At the same time, Tiz still has butterflies in her stomach because she just recalled that Thor had agreed to bear a child with her. A couple of minutes later, Thor and the others reach the facility where the former Beast King is being preserved, and he notices that they are slowly being revived to attack them, so he uses his gun to kill as many of them as he can. However, Don urges him to stop this because he considers them to be valuable test subjects, but Thor gets so pissed off by that statement that he punches him in the face and tells him that the bodies in those cases are no longer human beings, so he is doing them a favor by putting them out of their misery. Just then, a 3D projection message appears to inform Thor and Third that Odin and his team have kept secret from them this entire time that the Earth has actually been destroyed for over 100 years now by a meteor. Third hears this and immediately falls to his knees because he had dedicated his entire life to helping Thor become the Beast King, so that he would be granted a one-way ticket to Earth. But now that he has found out it was destroyed, he finds his life to be meaningless, just like Thor. After this, they arrive at the main control room and Don tries to input the abort code, but strangely, it denies him access. Because of this, Thor suggests that they destroy the control system as a whole with the hope that it would terminate the entire self-rotation process. However, Don isn't in support of this idea because he has spent so much time on being that system. But even with that said, they still go on to destroy the system, which terminates the self-rotation process just as Thor had predicted. Unknowingly, the destruction of the control system has triggered a self-destruct function, meaning that they all have about 20 minutes to get out of there, or else they will be toast. As they make their way out, Don can tell that they're not going to make it out in time, so he sacrifices himself to the plant monster, which gives Thor and Third a chance to escape. Meanwhile, on Chimera, Zagi is having a conversation with Tiz, when all of a sudden an assassin comes out of nowhere to try and kill Zagi with his gun. But to his surprise, Tiz jumps in front of him to protect him from the bullet, causing her to die slowly. Then suddenly the ground cracks open and causes them both to fall into the same plant-surrounded bunker that Thor and Karen fell into not long ago. Zagi can tell that Tiz is soon going to die, so he knows that Thor will be devastated to find out about this. Simultaneously, as Thor and Third are just about to escape, an explosion occurs which causes Third to fall to the lower bunk, but Thor is there to catch him just in time. Third knows that Thor can't save him in this case, so he pulls out his gun and uses it to end his life, which provides Thor the opportunity to get to the roof and make it out safely. At this point, he notices that his skin color and facial structure have changed to that of Third's, after which he is taken back to Chimera by helicopter. Ever since that day, Thor has decided to keep Third's facial appearance and leaves the rest of his life normally with Chen and the rest of the Ochre Ring.